it's ready for dialogue. France brings in more measures to get a handle on Omicron cases. Wait times for booster shots are reduced, and the army is brought in to speed up the country's vaccine drive. And France 24 goes to Paris's Indigenous Art Museum to take a look at their new exhibition focusing on Bandundu in southwestern Congo. Hello and welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Fraser Jackson. It's good to have you with us. Russia has unveiled proposals which would limit the role of the US and NATO in former Soviet Union states. The proposals call for no new military bases to be built in Eastern Europe and for no other country to join NATO. A top US official says the proposals were unacceptable, but Washington said that it's ready to talk with Moscow. It comes the day after EU leaders threatened the Kremlin with massive consequences should Russia invade neighbouring Ukraine. James Vizina has more.
It's just one of the requests that Russia says will de-escalate the situation around Ukraine.
The movement of the NATO alliance's infrastructure continues. It must end. We need to return to the positions which the two parties, Russia and NATO, held in 1997, when the founding act on our relations was signed.
In all, 8 demands, as Moscow hopes to turn back the hands of time and reassert its strength in Eastern Europe. The withdrawal would see NATO troops retreat from much of the region, including Poland and former Soviet Balkan states. Meanwhile, Russia also requests that Ukraine be banned from entering the alliance, threatening a similar response as the Cuban Missile Crisis, should their requests go unanswered. Proposals that don't sit comfortably with NATO, although the United States say that the requests mean that Putin hasn't made a decision to invade Ukraine.
We're going to put on the table our concern with Russian activities that we believe harm our interests and values. I have high confidence in our capacity to see what has been a significant Russian military buildup in the vicinity of Ukraine and in Ukraine itself, in Crimea and other places.
US officials say that Russia has positioned around 70,000 troops along its border with Ukraine and that it's planning for a possible invasion of the country as early as next year. The conflict between Moscow and Kiev broke out in 2014 when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula. An estimated 13,000 lives have been lost over the past 7 years.
As the Omicron COVID variant continues to spread, France is bringing in new measures to tackle the rising cases. French Prime Minister Jean Castex announced that the waiting time for booster shots would be reduced from 5 months to 4 and that the army is being mobilised to speed up the vaccination drive. Well, on top of that, the government is tabling a bill to replace the country's health passport system with a vaccine passport, meaning anyone hoping to get into a restaurant or other indoor space will have to be fully vaccinated. Let's take a listen to what he said earlier.
We accept that this is a major constraint for unvaccinated people, but it's needed because the beds in our emergency services and intensive care units are for the most part taken up by people who haven't been vaccinated. Unauthorised gatherings and alcohol consumption in public places will be banned on New Year's Eve, and we will ask local councils not to organise large-scale events such as concerts or firework displays.
Well, for more on this, earlier we spoke to Pierre Tatevin. He's the head of the Infectious Diseases Department at Rennes University and told us that a significant number of infections are occurring in children and that France shouldn't shy away from vaccinating them.
So this population is not the one that will suffer the most with the virus, but they can suffer, and they are playing a big part currently in the transmission of the virus to their parents, to their grandparents. So it makes sense, especially now that we know that the safety of the vaccination in this age group is quite good. It has been shown in the US, in Israel. So even for the children, the risk-benefit ratio appears to be good. We'll need to have a few weeks of pause between the end of the 5th wave that we are currently experiencing with the Delta variant and the onset of the wave that will certainly come in France with the Omicron variant. And one of the ways to have this pause, a few weeks that we can avoid too much cases in the hospital is to decrease the contamination here and to increase our protection with vaccine.
Paris police have partly dismantled a criminal ring that was selling thousands of fake COVID health passports. Well, earlier in December, 2 people were arrested, but they're suspected of being part of a group that has netted €2 million in the scheme. France's Interior Ministry has opened hundreds of investigations to try to bring down the racket, but an estimated 110,000 fake passes are believed to be in circulation. For the 3rd day in a row, the UK has announced a record number of COVID infections. Over 93,000 cases were reported on Friday, up 5,000 on the day before. As the country frantically tries to give booster jabs to the adult population, fears are mounting that the National Health Service will soon be overwhelmed. The spike came the same day as Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government was dealt a crushing blow in an election largely seen as a litmus test for his leadership. Lauren Bain tells us more.
The UK reported 93,045 new COVID cases this Friday. It's the 3rd day in a row the country has hit a record number of infections. According to authorities, Omicron cases are now doubling in less than 2 days in nearly all regions of England. The soaring numbers come at a time when Prime Minister Boris Johnson suffered a massive loss in a by-election. His party has historically held this rural constituency in central England. The recent blow signals a change in the party's reputation.
Clearly, the vote in North Shropshire is a very disappointing result. Of course, I understand that what voters want us as the government to be doing at all times is to focus on them and on their priorities.
Leading up to the vote, the PM had been shrouded with a series of scandals. The reason the by-election was called in the first place was after a former member in Johnson's party quit among corruption accusations. The results add a sense of pressure on Johnson, whose reputation is on the brink among members of his own party.
The House has got time to think about this, and the party's got time to think about this. We've had 2 strikes. First of all, the Conservative Party in the House of Commons earlier this week. Now this result. One more strike and I think he's out.
Gale is the first MP to publicly send a letter of no confidence in Johnson. If more letters are gathered, this could see to the removal of Johnson from leadership.
138 migrants have been rescued by the French Navy after they tried to cross the English Channel in makeshift vessels. Migrant crossings have been a bone of contention between France and the UK as over 30,000 people set off for England in 2021. While moving to Africa, and the Gabonese Football Federation has suspended a top football coach as an investigation into sexual harassment claims gets underway. Patrick Azumu Ayi has been accused of raping, grooming and exploiting young players when he was the coach of the country's under-17 football team. Ayi is currently serving as technical director for Gabon's Football League, but was provisionally suspended after revelations came to light in The Guardian newspaper. A journalist from the investigation spoke to France 24 earlier.
We'll publish more names in The Guardian in the months to come. Over the course of the 2.5 years that we spent on the investigation, we found that over 15 people are involved. From Europe to Asia or South America, it's endemic. There isn't a continent that isn't affected by this. The problem is that authorities have been closing their eyes for decades on what we say is the biggest taboo in the sporting world. Thousands of youngsters' lives are being ruined by male and female predators. I want to thank all the Gabonese boys and girls who spoke to me. The country should be proud of them, and I think that this will set a precedent for the world of sports, because this is the first time that we're actually talking about this abuse on such a scale.
On Friday, the streets of Tunis were divided, with conflicting cries of no to the coup d'etat and we stand with Kais Saied, as several hundred protesters, both pro and anti-government, took to the streets to commemorate the 11th anniversary of the Tunisian Revolution. Camille Nedelec has this story.
The crowd brandished portraits of their hero, President Kais Saied, as they celebrated the 11th anniversary of the Tunisian Revolution. The date was changed earlier this month by the president. It is now on the day of the tragic self-immolation of street vendor Mohamed Bouazizi, an event that sparked off the Arab Spring and eventually brought down the Ben Ali regime, a symbolic shift backed by Sayed supporters.
بالنسبة لتونس مش مقسمة على الجوج، الكلنا توانسة، الكلنا شعارنا هو الراية الوطنية، محبتنا في تونس. عيد الثورة هو يوم نهار 17.
اللي هما الشعب الكادح اللي ماهوش لاقي حقه جملة، اللي هو يناضل على الخبزة وعلى صغاره وعلى داره فهمني، وماهوش واصل. هذاك عليه ماشي مع السيد الرئيس.
Elsewhere in the city, a much larger crowd of around 1,000 anti-government protesters were out in the streets after having been refused access to the city centre. They feel changing the date of the anniversary is rewriting history.
إذا كل واحد انطلقت الثورة بتراكمات لين جت 14 جانفي هي لعزلة النظام، هي التتويج. المفروض يبقى يحافظ على 14 جانفي.
Protesters denounced the president's power grab this summer when he fired the prime minister, suspended parliament and seized control of the judiciary.
حتى في القانون الدستوري بتاعنا ما يتحلش البرلمان، ما يتحلش وما يتمسش، يبقى في حالة انعقاد. هو جاء كسر البرلمان.
Parliament is set to be suspended for another year until legislative elections on the 17th of December 2022. Sayed will also hold a national referendum on political reform in July next year.
And finally, Paris's Quai Branly Museum focuses on indigenous art and objects from outside of Europe. Its next exhibition is called Out of the Shadows and is shining a spotlight on Bandundu in southwest Congo. France 24's Julien Sauvage